Putting on airs.
Yeah, and it's starting to record now. We can just talk, and as people join in, we can
Um,
hang out.
so were you thinking about joining that hike with Hannah?
Oh yeah,
The
on the
hikes,
weekend?
yeah.
Totally.
Wait, did you do it or were you thinking about
No,
doing it?
I'm thinking about it. I keep getting the emails and I'm having FOMO by like not replying
Yeah,
back to them all the time.
yeah, and it's so interesting. I didn't know that like you could be like a hike master or like hike leader. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting? Like I didn't know you could get accreditation in that. And I
Yeah,
love hiking. Like I should do that.
it makes sense to me in the sense that what are actually on these trails. If you don't know how to navigate, you can get lost, right?
Right, right.
So I think that's awesome. Have you been on one yet?
No, no, I haven't been on one led by Hannah, but yeah, I'm sure it would be very informative.
Well,
I'm sure it'd be a good time. Like Hannah just has great energy and like she's
totally.
so knowledgeable. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think I would enjoy a hike led by Hannah for
Yeah.
sure.
Cool. Okay, there's some people joining us. We're just gonna wait a few minutes to see if more people log on, and you're probably just gonna hear us banter as we wait. I don't know about anybody here, but it is gray outside. For me anyways, and I'm in Waterloo right now and it is exhausting. So I'm really, really looking forward to actually some human interaction through this screen with you today.
Yeah, yeah, same, same. It's been like this week has already been so difficult. Like with everything that has been going on.
Mhm.
And yeah, yeah, the gray skies do not help.
No.
What I really want is some pho that doesn't make me sick. Like I had pho the other day and I think it was like the tripe, but I couldn't keep it down.
Oh
Like
no.
like it all came out and I was like, oh Lord, this is a waste of money.
Oh no. That's so sad. That's
I
so
need the good
sad.
where's the good pho? Where's the good pho?
That's a good question. Maybe people in our audience can let us know where some good pho is in town. Any good food really that's local, feel free to send us in. This makes me want to have a radio show.
Call in, let me know what your favorite local eats are.
Yeah, yeah,
Support
yeah.
businesses, support local.
Cindy, our VP, just sent us a message. I love pho. I miss eating in restaurants for pho.
Yeah,
We should have a virtual fun night.
I would love
Photo
that.
bow is A plus. That's what she says.
That's where I
For the
went.
Yeah, if
I
the
went to the
audience,
photo bowl.
you did, that's so
Yeah,
unfortunate.
yeah. Oh well. I'm sure there are different. Like I went to the photo bowl in Kitchener, so maybe the photo bowl elsewhere is better. But that's the one that I grew up going to. So it was the first
Right.
time I'd eaten pho there. That was like not good.
Oh no.
So yeah, I'm open to fanning out, finding different pho spots because I only ever go there for pho, and I think that was like a sign.
So I'm taking the challenge, and maybe we'll do like a GSA pho bingo card or something, and see what we can do. That'd be amazing.
And see, international students know the good food.
Yeah.
They know it. That's why all the good international food is like in the Waterloo Plaza,
Oh
like
yeah.
by the campus. Like it's actually
Yeah.
really good there.
Yeah.
So yeah, like anything that GSA can drum up, I would love that.
Cool. Take a note, Cindy, of these brilliant ideas. Let's formally start, and then we can just kind of keep entering and see what happens. But I want to do an introduction so people know what we're actually talking about here. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of #Politics Today. It's a GSA University of Waterloo speaker series that focuses on political issues and engagement in Waterloo Region and the broader political sphere. My name is Sabine Kamisa. I'm a PhD candidate in the Joint Laurier Waterloo Program, Religious Diversity in North America. My research interests are in religion and social movements. I'm also the Vice President of Communications for the Graduate Students Association at University of Waterloo. Episode 2 of #Politics Today is called Critical Engagement in Community Development, and we're joined by local journalist, activist, and graduate student Fitsum Areguy. to discuss his experience as a writer and organizer, his take on critical engagement and community development in Waterloo Region, as well as how to have a social impact. I'm going to be asking Fitsum some questions, but we also accept questions from the audience. So if you have any, drop them in the Q&A. Here's his bio. Fitsum Areguy is a Kitchener-based writer and shawarma poutine connoisseur. With words in Waterloo Region Record, Briar Patch Magazine. Am I pronouncing that right? Briar Patch?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, the Community Edition and Korea Expose. He seeks to explore how power and difference structure identities, communities, and relationships both locally and transnationally. Co-founder and lead editor of Textile Magazine, a community-engaged literary publication and mentorship program. University of Waterloo alum from Rec and Leisure Studies. If anyone's from Rec and Leisure, shout out to them. Now chipping away at an MA in community psychology at Laurier. Welcome, Fitsum. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
I feel like I am on a radio show, you know, like CBC, here we come.
You know what? I could see you doing a podcast and getting it taken up by CBC. Like I was just listening to Secret Life of Canada. I don't know if you've ever heard that podcast. No. It's really good. It's really good. My partner showed it to me and I was like, damn, like I didn't know CBC would back podcasts so cool like this. Like talking about some really, really interesting topics. Yeah, so you should think about it.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. So you wear a lot of hats. One of them is that you are a grad student. And since this is a GSA event, I think it would be cool if you could talk about that a bit. You're doing your MA in community psychology. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your research interests and how you kind of got there.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. So this, my graduate studies path is really not regular. It has jumped around schools and programs and has extended longer than I would have liked, although giving myself some grace because COVID made things really, really weird for my grad studies, as it did for a lot of people. But I started, so my path to graduate studies, as it does for many people, started in my undergrad with an honors thesis that looked at the experiences and challenges of young caregivers in post-secondary contexts. So young caregivers are people under the age of 29 who take on substantial caregiving roles. I wanted to look at, in my undergrad, young carers who come from diverse backgrounds, because that sort of reflected some of my own experience. As somebody who took on extra responsibilities as a second generation Canadian, it's a story that, you know, it's very familiar to lots of people. So it's not in some ways not unique. But what would have made it unique in the context of research was examining it through this idea of caregiving, where this role that people had in families because of their culture, when they come to Canada, the host country, that relationship, that dynamic becomes a caregiving one. So why is that? Well, it's because broader society, they look in at, you know, a family and a young person who's doing all these things. The family thinks it's normal because it is normal for them, but from the outside looking in, it's seen as abnormal. And so I really wanted to dig into that, but I wasn't able to in my undergrad. So that's what I took up in my graduate studies, first at Guelph, in their Masters of Science program in Family Relations and Human Development. And yeah, I just started on a path to look at young caregiving in refugee families and immigrant families, and then honed it down even further to examine the experiences of Black caregivers, Black young caregivers in post-secondary and what their experiences are like. But, and this is sort of where it gets contentious, I think that the most charitable thing to say about why I left that program was because it wasn't a good fit for me, for a lot of things. It was a program and a supervisor who I didn't have that like deep relationship with. And, you know, many people can have all sorts of experiences and tolerance levels with, you know, the supervisor or advisor they work with. But for me, the kind of relationship that I need with an advisor or supervisor it just wasn't what I was getting there. And so I left to work with somebody who I do have that relationship with. And COVID, it halted everything, but it also gave me a window through which I jumped through, because it stopped everything. And then I was like, okay, this is my chance now to actually think about not just what will be a better fit for me, but and to help me finish, but also how can I do graduate studies in a way that reflects my values? How can I imagine an academic life that is different than this sort of like, I'm trying not to use the word neoliberal, but
now you used
like,
it. Can you
I
define
used it.
for us?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about neoliberalism. You can't define it. You can't put your finger on it, and that's what makes it so nebulous. But academia is sort of seen as this pathway to the workforce, this thing that you have to do to get jobs, to get income, to get money, to buy land, to sort of family. And I wanted to, in my path, in my journey through academia, I wanted to envision and actually engage in a sort of academic practice that was different than that actually reflected, a relationship-based approach to issues, to the journey. And so I'm now getting that with my advisor, and it's a better fit for me. But anyways, it's 4 years in total now, and I'm just like, I do want to get done, but it's
I think it's the opportunity to kind of own our journey is not something we get to hear often from the institution. So I think students who are watching this will really appreciate that you shared that story and that experience. It's so funny because we were talking about this morning with my roommate, like about, the spirit of care, and what does, how does our university or any university right now during the pandemic consider the spirit of care? And when, no one's at the university, do we need, does it become a care from the institution or a spirit of care and a networked economy, and how does that shift the boundaries between the institution and what is the public? And it must be such a trip to study modes of care, and then how do you get care in the process of doing that work?
Absolutely. How do you get care, and also like, how do you do research in ethical ways like that really, that's tied into notions of care as well, right? And I find that more often than not, the pursuit of knowledge almost always supersedes care and ethical procedures, and the pursuit of knowledge is tied into securing funding, performance measures. That's something the province has been talking about more and more, right? All of these things push researchers into a publish or perish sort of mode, and that often has deleterious effects on participants and communities.
So let me ask you a question then, like, the spirit of care that you embody has translated into many different community initiatives. And I guess the first question I'd want to ask you is, like, why do you care? Why do you care about, ethical research and, being able to make a difference?
Why do I care? Well, I think it probably starts. So in 2012, I was at Laurier first. So it's been like 10 years of post-secondary for me, and I still don't have a PhD because I just kept switching programs.
Me too, I don't have one.
I just can't seem to cut that safety net off, but safety net academia. But I started at Laurier in English and Film Studies, double major. I want to try screenplays. I still do, but my mom got sick. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I was already doing so much that that sort of pushed me over the edge. And my marks started slipping, and I got into academic probation, and then I was kicked out of school. So that was a time in my life where it was very, very difficult. I was doing a lot for my family, and then someone who in my circle said, "Oh, you might be someone who's a young carer." And so I was onboarded onto a participatory action research project. And it wasn't until like 7 years later, and this is 7 years of like being the lead of a movement of an advocacy push. Like there are 1.28 million, approximately a million young carers in Canada, but we have no legislation that acknowledges them at all. So there's no support. It's a hidden army. This is what people in sort of the field talk about, that there's no social policy to acknowledge these young caregivers. And because there was really no one talking about it, any young person who sort of fit that mold was being put forward, and I was one of those people. And I leaned into it, but it wasn't until years later where I started to engage more critically with the identity of young carers and what shapes a young carer, what defines a young carer. It didn't start to sit with me. And when I draw the line back to when I was first recruited, I wonder if there could have been a more ethical way of engaging with me as a young person. And so, and that experience of being onboarded, and I think in many ways onboarded to push a social movement forward, which is something I see in many different cases. That social movements sort of take precedence over what people in communities actually want. It's for the greater good. I think that there needs to be harder, more self-critical conversations within fields, subfields, sectors about ethical ways to engage people. And that's embedded. It's that sort of ethos and that experience has defined and has become a filter for how I do everything, even journalism.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. So the next question I have is maybe adding to this, but so much of everything you do is beyond the university walls and in the community. As an activist, a journalist, a writer, an editor, a creator, you're really involved in the community. And I'm wondering where that starts for you.
Where it starts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder where where does it start for me? I mean, I guess I've always really been involved in my community. Like for the longest time, like since I was 12, like looking to volunteer, looking to give back. And this is interesting too, because if I situate that within a larger sort of picture where rates of volunteerism are declining, and they're not just declining, we maybe have similar numbers of people who are doing quick hit volunteer hours, or they need it for either court ordered or for school or something else towards a job, maybe in a particular sector. We're seeing less people volunteer for like a long period of time, who you might call lifers. And that's interesting because I wonder why people are volunteering less. But for me, I lived in a neighborhood in Kitchener, like Cortland Shelley, poor, Black neighborhood, a lot of refugees, a lot of new immigrants. We lived really close to a lot of social services, and I was really lucky to have people in my life who were mentors, people who, were there for me to sort of hone my leadership skills, to encourage me to take opportunities. And so I sort of, to quote T.S. Eliot, he has this, he has this poem where he talks about the still point within. It's a poem about dance, and T.S. Eliot has problems, but I like that idea of a still point within, where it's something that I keep circling back towards. And I want to, I want to always be engaging in that cycle of connection, reconnection, disconnection, because it reminds me of where I came from, and it allows me to keep doing that. And that's really, really important for me. Yeah, and so it's something that I just keep doing throughout my work. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or if that's too abstract.
Totally.
But
no, totally. I think the answer to that changes. It might be related, but a version of that at any given point in life, depending on where you're at in that circle and that cycle, might be a bit different. So knowing your work and following your work, it's just interesting to be able to ask you that at this moment in your life. We'll do another podcast in 50 years from now with the CBC, and we'll see how you answer that in the future.
50 years. In 50 years, wow.
That's how long it's going to take me to finish my degree.
Oh Lord.
No, I'm kidding. Just trying to.
You're only kind of kidding. You're only kind of kidding.
I'm kidding. Look how many books I have to get through. Okay.
Never doing a PhD.
I want to dive into your work a little bit. Not sure if how many people here are familiar with your work. So to be able to talk about it, I think would be really helpful to give some context. So I first met you when at the Textile magazine launch. So Textile magazine is focused on providing literary mentorship, art programming, publication opportunities for new and emerging writers and artists on the margin, showcasing the diversity of Waterloo Region. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about how this project came to be and why this mandate of showcasing diversity in Waterloo Region is important to you?
Yeah. So Textile Magazine is like it's a realization of like years of work in community service. So I worked for 10 years in the not-for-profit public sector with the YMCA, the city of Kitchener, doing community services, youth work. I worked as an independent facilitator with disabled communities. So all of this work, all of these experiences with these different communities. By the end of it, I was very, very, I knew where the gaps were, and I knew the things that I wanted to improve, but I wasn't able to do it within those systems. I needed to step outside of them to realize something else. And so Textile Magazine is not just a magazine that showcases folks. It's also a mentorship program, and that is really what makes Textile special, in that we work with, and we like to trouble the idea of who gets to be an editor. So in CanLit, or Canada literature broadly, editors are often seen as like the top of a hierarchy, right? There's these national, like even internationally renowned magazines, some even in our region, who it's making sure that they're the top of the hierarchy ensures that they continue their sort of their fame, or their sort of notoriety. Notoriety is not the right word, but it's very hard for people who just want to break into the field to do that, because and like the top of that pyramid is sort of kept the same. It's all mostly white, all upper to middle class folks. And so Textile takes a different approach, where our editors are also people who are community workers, people who work with communities in Waterloo Region, who know about the stories, but have never been told that those stories belong on the page. And so we bring in community workers, we work with them to A, find people, but B, also ensure that we're going through a relational approach. It's, we're not looking to parachute into different organizations just to pluck, marginalized stories and then say, look at what we're doing. Like, it's actually what we want to do is ensure that it goes through this process of relationship, and then mentor them. So it's like a 6-month mentorship. This year has been weird, so it's extended a little bit longer. But our editors work with community workers, and we find folks who want to write and develop those stories, and that's what ends up on the page. So it's really not, it's not like your typical like submit to a journal and then if we like it, we'll work with you, and if not, we're very intentional about who we work with. And so Yeah, and so that to me, that's what I always wanted to do. Like I always wanted to do that sort of work, in the various places I was employed, but like I never got the funding, I never got the support. And so um, in 2016, that's when I sort of stepped away from it. And I was like, what can I actually came up with the idea with Andy Miles, my partner and co-founder, while I was in Korea. And we were talking like, across seas, 12-hour, 13-hour difference, coming up with this idea that sort of looks like community service, community work, community advocacy, but brings that into CanLit. So
Wow.
yeah, that's how Textile came to be.
Wow. So shout out to Aaron Francis, who I think has a piece in your textile,
Yeah.
the first issue, I believe. He's
Yep.
also the GSA's equity coordinator. So shout out to Aaron. If you folks haven't had a chance to read Textile Magazine, I highly recommend it. It's really good. I had a chance to attend the launch and to hear some of the pieces, and it's the amount of talent in our region. And I think that's like, for me, the interesting connection here is like the talent, the creativity that exists here that we don't get to see because these platforms haven't existed previously. So to have this opportunity to be invested in that, I think is pretty cool initiative that you were able to start.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, shout out Aaron. I'm excited to share issue 2. Because of COVID, it doesn't seem like we're going to get issue 2 out for 2020, but we have like 150 pages of creative writing, of art. It's going to be like, it's going to be a thick book, a thick book, but yeah, you can buy it online and it'll be in stores locally. So yeah, I'm excited for it. Yeah, we'll digitize it. Yeah, access matters. I mean, it's meant to be something beautiful as well that you can put on your coffee table, and hold. Sort of the materiality matters, but we also want access. So all the pieces will be online on our website.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So that to me is a huge project, but also another huge project for you this summer that people might recognize you more for nowadays is your participation in the KW Solidarity March for Black Lives Matter and the defunding the Waterloo Regional Police Service initiatives and movements. I'm wondering if you can talk about that. I know many of our viewers are international students who may be familiar with some of these movements that we're mentioning, but may not have the context for it. So if you could just provide a little bit of like what your role was in these movements and why did this movement take place in Waterloo Region specifically?
So my involvement with the KW Solidarity March for Black Lives was as a key organizer. And I mean, it came together very, very quickly, but it builds also on years and years of work. So, while I may have been part of the organizing team, we certainly would not have been able to get to that point without, years of work from the Congress of Black Women, the KW, the Waterloo chapter, from the Caribbean Association of KW, so there are a lot of organizations that have been, locally based that have been doing work for a long time that I think are important to recognize here. But yeah, I mean, at the time I was a part of the African Caribbean Black Network of Waterloo Region, or the ACB network. The network is meant to, its sort of mandate is to draw attention to racial injustice and issues of equity as it relates to, the African diaspora in Waterloo Region. So I was involved with that network, and yeah, the march. I'm somebody who likes to work very much in the background. So, I did a lot of the sort of the research around, the actual amount that, that we wanted to see the police defunded by. I was involved with I took lead with some of the, the writing for the movement. And then, yeah, just the coordination on day of, like, speakers and ensuring that donations were set up. But this was really a team of people. Aaron was part of that team. So yeah, I mean, that's,
Mm-hmm.
it's weird to talk about my role in it because it really was a collective. And yeah, I think it's a movement that we're seeing is bearing fruit in our region, to this day. I don't know if you saw, the city of Waterloo passing a motion recently. That's a step in that direction,
You want to
We're
mention the
seeing.
motion so people who are here who might not know what it is?
Oh yeah, the motion was the motion was put forward by Councillor Jen Vasic of City of Waterloo Council to urge the upper levels of government and the Waterloo Region Police Service Board to work together to examine police legislation and to discuss how to move towards interventions and programs that actually prevent crime, that actually keep communities safe. And so that involves reallocating funding to instead of downstream. People like to talk about upstream versus downstream, right? Downstream is policing, upstream is social programming. It's ensuring that people have what they need so that they don't engage in criminal activity. And so yeah, so it doesn't have, I mean, it doesn't have any power, but the power is in its sort of public stance. It's saying, okay, this is what community is saying. We stand behind community. So it meant a lot to see the city of Waterloo lead with that, and hopefully other cities and townships around the Waterloo region do too. But it's a ripple effect, right? I mean, this is if we talk about having an impact, that march brought out 30,000 people approximately. That was the third largest in Canada. It's big. It was historic. It's a historic march. And so I think we're going to continue to see the ripple effects of that for years to come.
Absolutely. Even the climate, this has been like a huge year for huge movements, like in the sense of like taking up space in the public means so much now when you're talking about a pandemic, right? When you can't go out and lockdown, what statement does it make to have these big crowds out? You're looking, if you're following the farmer protests right now in Punjab, across Canada, huge numbers too, right? But in Waterloo Region, it was something else to live through. Even the climate march was a significant turnout this year also. And I think that's really pointing to the fact that like a lot of the students and young people who are living here, there's a shift in mentality that they actually live here now, and that they're committing to live here, and that their involvement in quote unquote the gig economy or these alternative ways of producing these types of platforms like yourself with Textile Magazine is like, it's innovation in a completely different way, and they're committed to these creative relationships. I think, there's a conscious decision now that people will stay here. One, because it's cheaper to live here than say go to Toronto. But also
that's not saying much because of how expensive it is here, but yes.
And the proximity to like, technological innovation hubs and the universities. And I noticed that difference. I've lived here since 2006 and I've seen that change. So I'm going to ask you this question. Out of all the years you've lived here, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen, or what do you take of the changes that you see in Waterloo Region?
Yeah, well, I've lived here my whole life, and so it's interesting too. Like sometimes you don't realize it's changing until you sort of step outside of it. Like when you're in it, it's sort of things sort of creep along. At least when you're younger, like I don't think I've really fully comprehended all the changes until I was like much, like in my 20s, or like late teens. And yeah, I think some of the biggest changes are, the shift from industrial sort of like factory industrial type of jobs, like that really defined the region. And I'm thinking even before my time, that those changes were happening, right? We think about Schneider's factory, we think about Kaufman, like all these different, like these giants of industry were here in this region. And slowly, because of the shift in sort of globalist markets and outsourcing work that would have happened here elsewhere, that really pushed a lot of these companies to the brink, and then they were no longer. But I think, and there are a lot of things I could talk about, but I think what's really interesting that I'm noticing is that some of the biggest changes are that things are not changing. And it's even though, so for example, Schneider's factory, I live down the street from Schneider's factory. Schneider's was one of the, like Schneider's meats. Like if you have any idea of sort of meat and the meat industry in Canada, like Schneider's was nationally recognized. It was huge. And then it was bought by Maple Leaf Foods. I think that's, I might be, is that right? I think that's right. Yeah. And then slowly and surely it shuttered. It sort of after 100 years of hiring people, it shut down. And now it's turning into this really, really glitzy, development with parks and like mixed use, space. It'll make maybe retail. It'll have condos. It's set to be something really, really beautiful, and people are excited about it. And when they created a contest for what, it was a public contest that they put out to name the place, they settled on the Metz being the middle name of Joseph Schneider.
Wow.
Joseph Metz Schneider. Metz is also short for Metzger, which is the German word for butcher. But it's interesting to me. And then you see Kaufman, like the factory turned into Kaufman Lofts, and you see all these different things, these legacies of Waterloo Region.
Gentrified legacies, right? Like
totally. they become entrenched. and it reproduces power by doing so. And so I find that very, very interesting that we're seeing all sorts of changes, yes, but the things that we hold on to reflect the identity that the region wants to keep dear. And I think interrogating that is really, really important.
That's a great take. That is probably one of the most brilliant things I've heard about our region. That's fantastic. Because I think about that, right? Like I still feel like I'm new here, even though I've lived here for a while, and to see the desire for change and who those power people are, there is a shift, right? Like, and then people wanting to completely alienate themselves from that power by doing their own thing and creating their own little like counterculture spaces in the region, which we used to have way more that were visible. And it's really interesting to see now how people are forming these creative relations in their own homes, literally using their own homes as like concert spaces, and because those spaces don't exist elsewhere in the region.
Yeah,
it's pretty fascinating. But you're talking about interrogating, and I think this goes to the next big thing that you do now is you're a journalist. And so you've lived in Kitchener-Waterloo most of your whole life, and you've had all of these experiences working in different sectors, and now you're critiquing it in some ways through your journalism. And I'm wondering, like how's that going for you? What's it like to take up a different method of writing and keep in mind your central thesis of care and action?
Yeah, it's it's been interesting. I'm not trained at all in journalistic writing. I mean, I obviously love to write and I've been writing for a long time, but journalistic writing takes a very, this is why people go to journalism school or J school, to learn how to craft stories that can appeal for a wide readership, stories that are incisive and well researched, but the pace at which you have to publish is really dizzying and faster than what I've ever known before. So it's been very, very it's been really difficult, a steep learning curve for sure, but I'm getting a lot of support from the editors and from other reporters. But I definitely do bring a critical lens to what I do, and that makes it difficult because with dailies, so there's all different types of journalism. What I'm writing for is a daily newspaper, so you have to push out stories, like you're expected to write stories at least 3 a week. And then some people do stories every single day, and it's like it's amazing. I'm always astounded by how talented the reporters are, and the Record is the biggest newsroom in the region, so there are more people and just more hands on deck. But and this goes back to what we talked about earlier in sort of my process, the way that I engage community. So I got hired because of my access to community. They were like,
They say that to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And so they were like, you have relationships that we don't have, that we can't, we can't walk into certain neighborhoods and get people to trust us because like they don't have that same relationship I do. So they said, you can bring that, and then you can also talk about data and pair data visualization with neighborhood stories. And so I was like, bet, okay, I think I can do that. But then, so the first sort of my first day in our virtual newsroom on Zoom, it was when Abdesalam Omer, he's a Somali man who was violently arrested by the Waterloo Regional Police on July 5th. And that was the story. People were messaging me about it the night of, and that was Sunday night. Monday was my first official day at the Record, and so they hadn't even heard of the story. So I broke it to the newsroom, and then, but it was also my week of orientation.
Yeah.
So I wasn't equipped or ready to take on that story, so I had to hand it off to other reporters. But I really wanted to write something, so I asked if I could continue to write about it, even so there was a whole week of reporting, and it was on the heels of the march. So the police were under like immense scrutiny. Witnesses were hesitant to talk to reporters, but they got some folks to go on record to talk about the impact it had on the community, but nothing that really went like to this ground level. So I asked if I could write about it, and I did it in such a way. I did it in the way that I knew how. So I engaged the Somali community in a healing circle before I even reached out. That was the following weekend, and talked about the harm and how to heal from the harm and how to move forward. And that was with some other community leaders. And then once I had done that, then I had a leader in the community take me to the parking lot across the street where it happened. That parking lot is a meeting spot. So I spent 3 nights in a row in that parking lot talking to people to cross-check statements and to ensure that I had the right story, and I built out a timeline. And then in a stroke of luck, I got the footage from the gas station where it happened. And that's really rare. Usually that gets taken by the police. Somehow I was able to get it, and was able to pair that with witness statements, and what they were saying was matching with what the footage was showing, and was able to create this piece. But that whole process took me. It was 7 days after the event. With reporting, usually you're supposed to do things a lot quicker than that. But for me, yeah, you're like 7 days is way past. Like the news is old at that point. Like people don't usually return to stories like that. So, but I got the support from my editors to do that, And I got statements that there was no way that other reporters were going to get the statements I got, because of my relationship to the community. I literally, some of the people I talked to were youth I used to mentor as a youth worker, and so, but there was no way I was just going to, there's no way I was going to take the approach that the reporters were going to take. I needed to do the healing circle. I needed to do this slow sort of building relationships and building trust, even if I need them. And that was important for me. And it turned out into a great piece. I think probably one of my better ones. So
talk about the ethics of research, right? Like,
yeah.
And centering care in the process. Like, I think that is remarkable. In terms of the piece, did they in terms of editing and all that kind of stuff for a piece that took that long, was there a lot of mentorship that you got in terms of like structure and when it came? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, for sure. Especially because it was like one of my first ones. Like, yeah, a lot of support from my editors about like pacing and structure and how to build a timeline. So yeah, I'm feeling really, really, really lucky to have the support I'm getting, but it's also, it can be a little bit like with that story, with who I was, who I am, and that topic and my proximity to it. Like it's so hard to describe what the impact was of like seeing the police officer punch him like again and again and again, like reviewing the footage again and again. Like that could have been me, that could have been my brothers, that could have been, and it was just like, the impact of that is not something that the newsroom knows how to deal with.
Yeah, because they're not part of the community that way. The community is that way, right?
They can help me write stories, and they are helping me write stories, but they don't know how to deal with that, and so I have to look elsewhere for it.
Wow.
So
Fascinating. I wonder then if so we've talked about different types of work you do and different types of writing. Okay, well, one question I want to ask you is, have you ever thought about writing a longer political essays as opposed to just journalistic pieces? Is that something you're working on? Like, I see the smile on your face. Are you doing a political magazine? Is that what's coming out now?
Yo, next question. Listen, okay, I will say that I'm very interested in long form political pieces. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I want to circle back to this, you're a grad student and now you're doing all this other types of writing. How, like, what's the bridge between the two? Is there a bridge between the two? And how does your academic training, if any, as a grad student impact the way you write these pieces and vice versa?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting because what the record has taught me more than anything, what journalistic writing has taught me more than anything, is how to make pieces resonate with people. And I think that's a really important tenet for research. When you're writing research, when you're creating knowledge, how sad is it when nobody reads your article, when the things that you're finding are never implemented? And so, knowledge mobilization, knowledge translation, it's called a few different things. People like to think about knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization as separate, as a important but separate thing from research. And I actually think that's, there are people who, there is an entire program around knowledge mobilization, so I'm willing to be challenged on this, but I do think that people need to be thinking about knowledge mobilization from the get-go. Like, you need to, when you're doing your research, you also have to think about how it's disseminated and how it will resonate with people. And so I think that more than anything, as I mentioned, writing for the record has taught me. I can see the metrics of the, how people are engaging with different stories. And you have to, like, the stories that are a little more insular or are like sort of drill down on certain issues, they don't do as well. And the ones that sort of hit a nerve. Like, for example, I wrote a story about what was happening in Cambridge around sort of, there were online groups that were talking about the problem of encampments and people using drugs. And I reported on some of what was happening in these online groups. And that was by far my most shared story,
Right.
because it hit a nerve with people. And that was really, really interesting to me. And I'm not, I mean, I think people could also take that feedback and say, oh, like shock journalism is good. And I want to really emphatically say, no, I do not think that, clickbait stories are good. But that was an issue, that it was dividing a community, and we're talking about people's lives here, people who are living on the streets. And as winter approaches, I mean, we don't have many out of the cold programs. These encampments are all people have, yet people are going into encampments and destroying them, or pressuring them to leave, not in my backyard, et cetera, et cetera. So it was an important issue to write about. I'm really glad I did, but it was taken up, is by far the most engaged story that I had. And I would imagine, students who are, creating research want that sort of engagement on their research. And I think it's about choosing topics that are, there are so many things I want to write about that are not gonna matter as much. Like, they're intellectual curiosities. Like, I want to write about God of War, and anti-Blackness in God of War, like ahead of God of War, like the next God of War that's coming out. I would love to do that, like game studies, critical game studies. Like, I really want to write something about that. Now's not the time. I know, game studies, and
I'll tag them in there.
Kratos and how he's been taken up over the years, and actually care also, like the concept of care in the game, and how it manifests in masculinity. And anyways, I really want to dig into this, but now's not the time. Right? Not only am I too busy to write that story, or to write that piece, or to do that research. It's not as relevant for the public. And I think that's really important for researchers to think about, students to think about, like, what is going to matter for the community. So
I think it's a good question, especially for people who are doing like human-centered research, like in terms of like anthropology or something like that, where you're interacting with people on a day-to-day basis. You're in the field, right? You're in the community. And it's something I think about a lot in my research on Sikh activists. Like, I wouldn't write this if the community didn't want me to write it, and if it was going to have an impact on them in some way. I'm not part of the Sikh community, right? Like, it's something that I have to think about on a regular basis, and check in on the community. So talk about impact, right? Like, that's a significant question that, I think when it takes the idea of like research ethics in a different direction beyond just legal forms. What kind of impact are we actually having on the people that we then their actual lived experience, and if you're doing something more historical, what's the legacy of those ideas that are going to carry forward?
I was just about to say that. You beat me to it. I was going to say, right, like, if you're in the humanities, or or history, like, how do you challenge the onto-epistemological foundations on which your field is built? Like, you have to step outside of it. Like how I stepped outside of systems to create platforms for other people. You need to step outside of this way of thinking to actually create impact. And to actually shake things up. And like, we're just, it's time to be critical of Western humanism. It's important. But I was gonna say something though. What was I gonna say? Shit. Oh, right. Oops, shouldn't swear. Okay. Like, even engineering students, like students in STEM, I was talking to somebody who I think is really sweet and really, really kind and cares a lot for community. And, I wanted to know about contracts that, or like work that they've done as an engineering student. And they told me that they did some work with Lockheed Martin, And then, and it's also, it's an open secret. Like we know
Yeah.
the kind of money
Yeah.
that, you know, arms manufacturers,
Absolutely.
weapons manufacturers pump into our region and pump in specifically into our university and the Faculty of Engineering. Students can make that choice to say, I'm not going to take those co-ops.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm part of something called this is a shout out to the Council of Responsible Innovation and Technology through the university. And it's all about this exact question. Like, how do we ensure that students who are in these programs, who are developing this technologies, have that knowledge that is more privy to humanities and social sciences, about the culture of the field and the politics of the field, the sociological approach to their field. So that way, when they develop their research ideas and technology ideas, they're thinking about that exact question. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's an interdisciplinary group of people, students, undergrads and graduates, and it's really, I'll send you some stuff on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like something I'd want to join.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Oh, that's cool.
So if anybody has questions from the audience, now is a good time to do it. I'm going to ask you one question to kind of wrap things up. But, you know, the series is really about, you know, as graduate students, if we're in that traditional line of thinking of academia, it's really easy for us to be in a bubble and stay isolated and not really think about the impact we're having in our community that we live in which we study, in the land upon which we live and reside and work on. So what advice would you give to students who have never read the record before, who don't know anything about Black Lives Matter, who don't know that things like Textile Magazine exist in the region? What do you say to those students and how to navigate our region that way in terms of developing a critical engagement to community development?
Okay, so I'm gonna share a story that gets at this exactly. So I went to, this was pre-pandemic, and I went to a house show called Locomotive. I don't know if you remember Locomotive, maybe not. Okay, so it was these, it was run by these two students who were part of UW's DJing DJ club, and it was like, oh my gosh, like the show, the music, like it reminded me of a show I would go to in Montreal or Toronto, like that level of like amazing house music, like amazing dance. And not just that, it was like a community where people from all over the region were coming to, and they had clear rules, like, you know, this was going to be a safer space. And like, this is like, they weren't going to condone any sort of discrimination or whatever in that space. And so it was just tightly run, amazing music and set lists. That was like one of my favorite party series in the region, like in Waterloo, bar none. And they invited everybody. So people that I knew from like way back when, like who used to party in like factories and like in warehouses in Kitchener, like people who are much older than me were coming to this thing. So people, it was a weird and awesome cross section of folks, but it was also run by university students. So they were getting university students to come out too. So they had, I remember one night, they had a bunch of, I believe it was Indian students. I think all of them women or femme presenting, and they all came through. They had come from an event at Rim Park, I think. And they were dressed in traditional garb, and they came out to the party. They didn't know what they were getting into, and they were like, they didn't like it. They were like, oh no, we don't like this. You know, we don't want to do this. You know, this is just there's too many people we don't recognize here. And it was like, on one hand, I was like, you know, I'm sure more can be done to pave the way for connection, the cross-cultural understanding in spaces like that. But it is so important to get out of your circle, to engage with people. And I also want to acknowledge that in stepping out of your circle to engage with the community can also lead to harm and increase risk. So I want to acknowledge that. But I have met so many international students come through our region who whose idea of fun was taking the LRT or the bus from Waterloo to Fairview and maybe walking around the mall. you
Right.
know? And it's like get out, like volunteer,
Mhm.
right? Like look for those opportunities for engagement with people who are not like you. That's
Mhm.
scary. It's really, really scary, especially if you're not, you know, if you're not, if English is at a certain level. I get it, you know, your whole, like your
Or you're
base
coming
is not there, you know?
or you're coming from a political context that's completely
Right,
different. Like in some
right.
cases, if you go out and just do that, the political ramifications, you don't know, right? Yeah.
And I think the onus is also on these places which would accept
Yeah.
people for volunteer opportunities or for engagement. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge that as well. But look for those opportunities to engage. This is
Mhm.
also about interdisciplinary practice, right? So
Mhm.
the more you engage with people outside of your circle, the more you understand the place where you live and the better you can create impact. It's
Mhm.
important. It isn't just about having a good time while you're here. It's also about understanding how you can change things,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
think,
see the
yeah.
gaps and see the things that you can bridge.
Totally. I think this is where, as graduate students who often become specialists would benefit from having a generalist kind of approach to living and be
Right.
able to see beyond just the fact that they're a university student and that there's more things in Kitchener-Waterloo to be experienced. There's so many hidden gems here, and the
Mm-hmm.
people, the network. It's a fascinating place to be, despite all of
Mm-hmm.
the problems. um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I think like as an activist myself, a community organizer from a very young age, as a university student, I really appreciate the experiences that you're sharing with us today. It's a really good uh, refresher of purpose, and hopefully bring some life to a gray day outside.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know what, like, and I appreciate that. I really, I love chatting with you, and this was a good experience. Also, just to talk things through out loud too, because all this is just in my head most of
mhm,
the time. But
mhm,
it's active when you say activist, that also reminds me that there are like really important human rights and like civil rights issues that need to
mhm,
get taken up in our region, and some of those issues are directly involving international students. The way
yeah.
that they are treated in our region is not equitable. It is not fair. It's not just. The just the whole thing makes me feel really uncomfortable, and it's something that I constantly talk about. But to address it, you need to build solidarity across
Mhm,
groups, right? That this is like any movement. This is like any sort of push to make things right. You need to build solidarity, but that involves reaching out and stepping outside of your comfort zone.
mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but
Absolutely. Um, Cindy doesn't have a question, but she wanted to say thanks and that she has a better understanding of how to critically engage in our community, especially during a time where we feel isolated. It felt like a really good podcast.
aw,
We're gonna
that's
do a
awesome.
podcast. Thank you so much, Fitsum. It's an honor. I think this is the first time we've had like an in-depth conversation, just you and I, about some of the things you're working on. And I'm really honored that you're able to share your story with me in this time. And I hope we can
Yeah,
keep talking about this stuff together.
yeah. Let's plan a Zoom call where we eat pho over Zoom.
Episode 2.1.
The follow up. It'll just be a food review.
The follow up.
Oh, okay. That's yeah. All right. Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
It's a good place to end. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.